Who gon' take it there? 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 Electricity, 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 electricity. You know what's in the air. 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 It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility.
All right, so first of all, today is the day of the nationwide strike in solidarity with Minneapolis to get ICE out of Minneapolis and ICE out everywhere. So if you are able to withhold your labor, not go shopping, not buy from large corporate conglomerates today, anything that you can do in solidarity with the people of Minneapolis, Alex Preddy, Renee Good, people have given their life to stand up to this police state. Anything counts, anything helps. And making an economic impact is the best way to make our voices heard on that issue. So anyway, comedian Whitney Cummings hosted on The Daily Show. They have a rotating cast of main presenters every week. Anybody from Roy Woods Jr., who quit, to Jordan Klepper, who's been there for a long time, Sarah Silverman, who's a Zionist, to now Whitney Cummings, who is just really a bizarre figure, bizarre person. I think she was a bizarre choice to come and do this. She's been caught up lately for like inflating her views to like millions of views on her podcast. And people were calling it out because she doesn't have that much engagement on her podcast and saying like, this is botted views. Then she came out and said, I don't use any bots, but her producer explained that they run Google ads on her podcast. So essentially what that means is that her podcast shows up as an ad on other videos. And that's something that YouTube can do now because they figure if people are buying views, they want it to be through YouTube and Google. So they created a system where you can do that. But the fact that she ends up on The Daily Show shows that that obviously worked, right? Like she didn't really need that to inflate her profile necessarily, but to inflate her visibility and her relevance in a certain space. That method seems to have worked, even though people were pretty loudly calling it out. So anyway, the main thing about this Daily Show thing is that she kind of just is taking the stance of people need to learn to accept terrible establishment Democratic candidates now, because the midterms are coming up and the presidential election in 2028 is coming up, and people need to get used to establishment characters like Cory Booker and Gavin Newsom and accept the fact that they suck. It's just kind of a weird segment. Here's that.
None of them are the dream candidate, okay? They're all gonna have issues that you're gonna have to deal with. Like Cory Booker, I know he's not very exciting, but he gets the job done. He's like the Skechers of candidates. Your aunt probably loves him, right? But he does have a big problem.
If Cory Booker became president, America would have its first vegan president.
None of these candidates are perfect. Stop holding out for another Obama. The best we can do is Josh Shapiro, who clearly is trying to sound like him.
Now let me tell you something. He's pretty afraid. Y'all see, he's backing out of the debate now.
But there's no perfect names here. There's AOC. I mean, she doesn't even have a name. She doesn't even have a name. You know? But people love her, but it does rub some people the wrong way that she goes by a 3-letter acronym, you know, like she's in the company of luminaries like MLK, FDR, and DMX. But look, Gavin also, he does unite both sides. Liberal likes him because he's mean to Trump, and conservatives like him because he let Los Angeles burn down. And that means something, okay? And what I guess I'm trying to say, America, is that we're not a young country anymore, okay? Look at our bridges. They're sagging. Our lakes, they're drying up. We're drying up, okay? We can't just pick apart every candidate and think that everything's gonna magically work out. This is the real world, not Nancy Pelosi's stock portfolio. No one candidate is going to check all the boxes for us. And if you keep holding out for Mr. Right, we're going to end up with Mr. Alt-Right.
Yeah, so, like I said, I don't think that Whitney Cummings has a strong enough perspective on this stuff to be featured on The Daily Show. I mean, if she wants to do political commentary, that's fine. And she starts off the segment with a joke about, I'm Whitney Cummings and I'm a liberal. You might be surprised to find that because most people think some people think I'm right-wing. I believe that she leans liberal and has that kind of affect, but being in this comedian space, I think she picks up on a lot of that slop that they're always passing around. And I think a recent clip from her show where she's talking about Venezuela and like international politics is a good example of that. So I'll show that in a second. But this weird Daily Show clip, I don't know, it's odd because they do go through and criticize each of these candidates and give some of them a little bit of credit, some more than others. So it's like, Gavin Newsom, they don't totally let him off the hook, but none of the critiques are particularly political. I mean, the worst thing that they can say about Cory Booker is that he's a vegan, and that's like not a good look. Not the fact that he's like a Zionist, like one of the most ardent supporters of Israel in the Democratic Party, at least in Congress. Same with Josh Shapiro. The worst thing about him is like the Obama impression, which is a good knock against him, except doesn't really get to the fact that he, I believe, compared pro-Gaza protesters to the KKK, and just ignoring kind of the heart of where America is at on these issues. At least a younger generation of voters that's only growing. Only going to grow from 2024. The voters that were first-time voters, some of which sat it out or voted for Jill Stein last time around, that group, that cohort of people is only growing right now. Who knows what it's going to look like in 2028 or even next year. But that's what consistently the Democratic Party is ignoring, and this is more of that. It would be interesting to see a segment like this that actually criticizes these candidates, but then makes the case that the milquetoast, boring Democrat is still better than the Republican fascist. I mean, that's a pretty tried and true liberal trope, but still that would be more honest than what they're doing here, which is saying that even the worst Democrat is only bad because they're sort of boring and unexciting. And while that's part of the problem, it's also just simply not true. There's a deeper problem with Democrats that does need to be addressed. And maybe Whitney Cummings didn't feel like that's her job to do that, like she wouldn't have credibility on that subject. That's possibly true, but it was just odd. I think she was an odd choice to come on and do this segment. It's well written, but also very calculated, centrist liberal programming of whether it's Gavin Newsom or Cory Booker or somebody else, just vote for that person. That person is automatically who you should accept. And that's the way it's spoken of because of this duopoly system that we have. And in general, it tends to be true. But the reality is that right now, if we can't learn the lesson from 2024 that generic Democrat who takes generic Democratic positions, calculated, compromised, it just doesn't work. It's not a winning formula against this strain of fascism. And hoping that this strain of fascism tires itself out is not a solution. Honestly, that might be what happens. But if you think you can't lose again to even a tired out version of Trumpist fascism, you're wrong. We've been wrong about it this entire time. So it's time for a real consideration of what actually makes these establishment Democrats suck. And I will say that there was some criticism of the financial ties of some of these Democrats from Whitney Cummings, so that was good. Credit for that. But here's a clip from her second most recent podcast where she mentions Venezuela, Greenland, and I think this is the best example of why someone who thinks this way is actually not all that helpful to the political conversation, except for on the side of the establishment and the authorities. And you'll see what I mean from this clip here.
The Venezuela thing is half my friends being it's for America to get the oil. And you're do you even know what you're saying? What parent at a pet store?
This is the first time that the government has explicitly said exactly why they did it.
In terms of America, why do they have to intervene everywhere? I'm going to play a little bit of devil's advocate on that if you're one of those people, which is we have a pretty even track record, right? For every World War II, there's a Cuba. For every South Korea, there's an Iraq, right? For every Vietnam, there's an Afghanistan. Right? We're batting 50-50 for intervening, right? I'm not going to say what I think is going to happen because I never feel I have enough information to do so. But I do feel when crazy people are in power, and Maduro's this dude's nuts. I'm big on non-intervention until there's a bully that can only be handled with a bigger bully. All I ask is that if you talk about the Greenland thing, if I see you at Starbucks or the airport, just don't be why is he trying to take? You don't have to like Trump to know that we need it. I'm just saying, make sure before you say this is ridiculous that we're trying to take Greenland, that you wouldn't say the same if Biden did it. There's things that you want in a perfect world, but you don't realize what needs to be stopped in order for that perfect world to happen. But sometimes the stopping something is preventing an act of aggression that you don't want later, but the stopping seems more aggressive. Or we never know what's been avoided all the time. Like I was talking to someone, I've been in the CIA a long time ago, and I'm like, just curious, like, because we make fun of you guys and think that you're like monsters who like put messages in our music and stuff, and like are just like like just drug addicts who just like manipulate people and like assassinate our favorite musicians and stuff. And I'm like, so like what's like, how much do you guys like stop something that could have like been a disaster and like we never hear about? He's like, truly 50 times a day. Like the whack-a-mole that they are playing to keep it, that they never get to tell us. I don't know what to tell you. China has 90% of all of our like rare earth elements. What do? Do we let them just have it and see how that goes? It's almost like some of you don't have a scarcity
so
complex.
A couple of interesting things here. First of all, there's obviously the premise of Trump wants to own or control these various places because obviously we need those minerals, we need those resources. So in one breath, she says, miss me with that, taking it for granted that what we want from Venezuela is the oil. But then she says, obviously what we want from Greenland is the minerals and the oil as well, even though she's, again, dismissive about that later. Like, the oil isn't really what we need from Venezuela, even though her producer corrects her that this is the first time that the American government has ever just come out and said, what we want is the oil. But Whitney is kind of taking this perspective of, like, these things are happening for a reason. And these geopolitical power balances and fights over resources happen for a reason, and it's best to trust the American like authority structure to work this out because the people in charge probably know what they're doing. And she also fleshes it out with this conversation with a CIA agent apparently, where she says, how often do you guys like save America in a way that we never know about and that they don't tell us about? And he says about 50 times a day, realistically. And she just like accepts that as true. So the thing is, like, she's saying, I'm going to play the devil's advocate here. But, like, the reality is we don't really need that perspective. Like, this is the thing about that perspective is the people who think that way just do it anyway. You don't really need to come out and, like, speak in favor of the people behind the scenes that are operating outside of the law to enforce American hegemony and to create pathways for us to profit from their oil, which was nationalized. Like, speaking for that just kind of makes you a tool for the State Department because, like, this is exactly what they would say about the matter. And in some cases, there's that argument to be made, like there's a big bad guy, but always there is scrutiny to be applied to the fact that the United States government is the one that feels like it can arbitrate these things. And ultimately, when it comes to oil in Venezuela, we're talking about nationalized oil reserves that skyrocketed the leverage that country had. And the main thing that America didn't like about that is that they were not allowing it to be capitalized and globalized like we expect most of these natural resources to be. And when it comes to Greenland, I mean, that's an ally of ours. We don't need to own that land. So if we needed Venezuelan oil to survive, which we don't, then fine, we take that oil because we needed its existential and it's a hostile foreign government. But Greenland is not that. So I don't know, it just seems like on the liberal side, that type of lack of scrutiny applied to the real sources of authority in our society, it's just like not really needed, And Whitney Cummings kind of does her thing talking about like everything other than politics. She got into trouble talking about Miss Rachel lately, not even in a political way, just saying she didn't like Miss Rachel, but she got dogpiled over that. And, she just doesn't need these political takes, and she can kind of just keep inflating her podcast. It feels like the future of her career is elsewhere than The Daily Show because she doesn't want to have to be tied to things like having accurate takes or being thoughtful or meaningful critiques of power. She doesn't want to have any obligation to that sort of thing. She wants to do something that's a little bit more surface level, and that's fine. But when it comes to the Democratic Party, we can see an example of why lack of ability to be ruthless about critiques of power and not demanding that from elected representatives in the Democratic Party leads to a very feckless and ineffective party when faced with something like the Trump administration, because you got this fight over ICE and funding of Department of Homeland Security. So all of a sudden, the Democrats have found themselves in a position where they have all the leverage and they can completely shut down DHS if they want to. And there's this overall budget bill that needs to be passed. Funding for DHS is a part of that. So what Democrats and Republicans originally agreed on was that they would carve out the DHS funding and pass the rest of it. And what they've agreed on now is that there will be a 2-week stopgap funding for DHS at previous levels while they figure out the negotiations for funding for the next year. So that's where these negotiations are taking place. But if this funding doesn't happen, DHS will be shut down. So that's ultimately the leverage that Democrats have. They are demanding things like body cameras and no masks anymore, agent identification, which are decent things, I guess, increased training. But ultimately what we're talking about is more funding for ICE. So in response to people being killed on the streets because of these military-style raids, their answer is that we're going to give you more funding and you have to use it to make these raids safer somehow. So that's not what's going to happen. And Democrats are obviously sheepish about taking the position of abolish ICE. But really, when it comes to the base, that's what people want to hear right now. They want Democrats to take a bold stance. And you could at least, if you get closer to that, you at least would have more negotiation power to say, we're going to make some radical changes to this organization under Trump so that it can't do things like this, like what Trump is doing with it. Democrats have the ability to reshape what Trump can and can't do with his Department of Homeland Security. So that's why it's important that they use this leverage properly now. And while they kind of missed the boat this time, Chuck Schumer caved because he is going to continue to underplay his leverage here for fear of not wanting to overplay his leverage. And in 2 weeks, this fight is going to come up again. And if it's less controversial at the time, then it's going to kind of just pass through. But right now is the day of the shutdown, the nationwide shutdown. So we're going to see how effective that is, how widespread it is. There are more protests planned on Saturday. There's a less economically focused protest, meaning just like a demonstration that I believe the No Kings or 5051 people are putting on. So, okay, great. But the economic stoppage, even if it's only for one day, how widespread and how militant that is going to determine how much of a turning point this remains right now, because Trump is trying to de-escalate in Minneapolis and essentially continue ICE activity everywhere else. And that's exactly what he's doing in LA. They're still being very aggressive about tackling people, arresting random people on the street. Nothing has changed about their nationwide approach. But what they're doing differently is they're trying to give the impression that they're drawing down in Minneapolis so that the temperature comes down and less focus is on ICE. So that's why what we need is not Democrats who are good enough and milquetoast liberals who get by because media critics refuse to point out the actual flaws in their agendas or their voting histories. But what we need is people who are willing to say ICE is a tool of a fascist agenda. And so we are going to use it as a point of leverage to bring this fascist administration to heel. And then we can talk about immigration enforcement once we have set the terms of that conversation. And Democrats do have the ability to do that, but much like Republicans, they're not going to do that or anything like it unless people force them to. And economic stoppage and labor action is the only way to do that.
Me too close to, too much to do. The mission is too crucial. Shout it out from the rooftops until I lose vocals. Who gon' take it there? 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 Electricity, 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 electricity.